Major League Baseball just announced their Gold Glove finalist, and Jeff McNeil, among other Mets, was absolutely snubbed. We'll discuss that on the show today. Also, the Arizona Fall League is going on. Are there any future contributors on the Mets that are out there in the Fall League? I'll break that down as well on this edition of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Now, it's a Friday Farm Report, so we're going to spend a majority of the show today going through the Arizona Fall Leagues, which Mets prospects are out there, and how they could potentially factor into the equation, whether it's next year or into the future, because I still want to spend a good portion of the show today on prospects. Yet, there was some news to discuss. Gold Glove finalists were announced, and Tomas Nido did end up getting the nod as one of the three catcher finalists, and that's awesome. At the same time, the voting is a complete sham, and I think that Major League Baseball seriously has to revisit how they do these awards, because they are giving the managers and the coaches 75% of the vote. And last year, I was pretty upset with some of the final votes that came in. How do you go through that entire season watching Marcus Stroman and Taijuan Walker play defense as pitchers and not give one of them the nod to even be a finalist? How was Lindor not awarded the Gold Glove and it was given to Brandon Crawford, even though if we look at the defensive metrics in 2021, Lindor clearly the top defensive shortstop. This year, while once again Lindor has been snubbed, not even a finalist, although granted, based on defensive runs saved, wasn't one of the top shortstop. Based on outs above average, he was. It was just basically Dansby Swanson as the only shortstop better than him, and him and Nico Horner were tied on the National League side. It's Jeff McNeil getting snubbed for me. I mean, we could discuss Brandon Nimmo not getting a nod as a finalist, but you know what? Look, while Nimmo had an amazing season, there's a lot of good defensive center fielders. Trent Grisham, I believe, deserves to win the award, 17 outs above average. He's right up there. He was a finalist. You had Victor Robles was a finalist. I don't even care that much about Nimmo. I think it would have been nice to see him acknowledged, but whatever. It's Jeff McNeil for me on multiple fronts. One, not a finalist at second base. I mean, that makes zero sense at all. If we look at the top second baseman in all of baseball this year, you have Jonathan Scope, who's insane, 27 outs above average. That's on the American League side. You have Andres Jimenez and Santiago Espinal on the American League side, 12 outs above average for Jimenez, 10 for Espinal, also 10 for Trevor Story. Then you have Tommy Edman, who is a finalist and I do believe deserves the award. Now, he's split time between second and short. Otherwise, he would have blown out the competition when it comes to outs above average. But 8 outs above average at second base for him. Behind him is Marcus Semien, also at 8. Then you have Jeff McNeil at 7. Beyond that, it's Ozzie Albies. Then you get to Jay Cronenworth, or some of these other guys. But no one else was really close to Edman but McNeil, yet he's not a finalist at second base. And taking things even further, he's not a finalist at utility. And that's what really frustrates me here. Now, the finalists were Edman, which, how is he going to win the Gold Glove at second and be a finalist at utility? Doesn't make a ton of sense, although I did argue that both him and McNeil should basically split those two awards, second base and utility. So I don't want to get too mad at that, but it's still a little bit ridiculous that he would be a finalist in 2 spots. We'll see. Maybe he wins 2 Gold Gloves in one season. We just say, wow, this is some really stupid voting that we have. But you got Edman, who, again, great defensive player I'm okay with. Brandon Rogers, we're going to put, or not Brendan Rodgers, sorry, Brendan Donovan, excuse me. Apologies for my mistake there, but Brendan Donovan, we're going to put as a utility finalist when you look at his season and where does he rank on the outs above average leaderboard? 17th percentile. 17th. And why? Because he's a really good defensive third baseman. That's bad everywhere else he played. Was a net negative at second base. In right field was atrocious. -4 outs above average and only 39 attempts. I mean, just awful in right field. So, yeah, he played all over, but didn't play all over well. How is he a finalist over Jeff McNeil? And then you got Dalton Varsho, who I'm okay with being a finalist because he's a great defensive player, and he plays catcher and outfield. So that's incredibly valuable. 17 outs above average overall. That's fine. But I also think if we're awarding gold gloves based on utility, I do wonder how the managers and the coaches, and even the sabermetrics people who have the other 25% of the vote, could get this so wrong that Jeff McNeil would not even be rewarded. Because you have a team that won 101 games, was a top 3 team in the National League. And Jeff McNeil and his utility function were able to accent this roster and allow them to play differently depending on the injuries that took place throughout the season, which is as valuable to a winning ball club as any player was this season when it comes to filling that super utility role. When Starling Marte goes down, to be able to slide McNeil into right field, to be able to play him at second base where he was elite, the second best second baseman in the National League, to be able to slide him into left field for portions of the season. How are we not acknowledging the season that Jeff McNeil had? And you talk about a player having notoriety. The guy won the batting title. So you can't tell me he doesn't have enough notoriety to win a popularity contest award. And you have Brendan Donovan in that spot. 2 utility guys from the same team, mind you, on the Cardinals. Yet you have Louis Guillorme and Jeff McNeil. Neither gets acknowledged. And look, Guillorme's case, while I think as a utility infielder he certainly is worthy, based on the defensive metrics, I don't think he had as good of an argument as a Jeff McNeil or some of these other guys. And look, if you want to tell me Dalton Varsho is going to win the award because he plays catcher in an elite defensive outfield, I'm okay with it, even though more an outfielder than a catcher at this point. He did play, I think it was 31 games at catcher, started about 17, so he did play out there, didn't have as much of a utility role as a McNeil, but I'm okay with that. It's the exclusion of him from the list. To have Edman on there, who's going to win at second base, and then to put Donovan ahead of him, I just don't get it. I really don't get it, and it gets to the point where I can't even really respect the process here because they've just got it so wrong. And look, if you want to say, look at me, I'm just a biased Mets fan who's clamoring for my guys. How about this one? Juan Soto was one of the worst defensive players in baseball this year. -15 outs above average. Only Andrew Vaughn was worse than him defensively this year. It was Patrick Wisdom, Jonathan Villar, and Juan Soto -15 outs above average. Andrew Vaughn at -19. And even taking it to a higher degree, Juan Soto defensively based on outs above average was worse than Kyle Schwarber this year. That's how bad of a season he had in right field. He's a Gold Glove finalist. It makes 0 sense whatsoever. I don't know what they're doing, and at this point, again, I just have 0 respect for this process because it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But we're going to get away from Gold Glove talk and get into prospects in just a minute here because I think that is where we should be spending more time and energy instead of just railing at a system that's broken in my opinion. But I digress. Now, before we get into Arizona Fall League action, I want to tell you about BetOnline.net, which is your #1 source for all of your football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, so for today's Friday Farm Report, I wanted to discuss the only prospects that are playing right now, those who are in the Arizona Fall League. And obviously, any big baseball fan knows the Arizona Fall League is where a lot of the top prospects go after the season to play in a competitive league where you get to see a lot of the future stars of tomorrow. And also you see some guys that you might not ever hear from again. It's a little bit mixed, but a lot of the best players end up at the Fall League at some point. And last year, for example, there was a couple of guys that were on the Fall League rosters that ended up making an impact on the big league team this year. So that foreshadows a bit what we could see. The big name last year was Brett Beatty. He was awesome in the Fall League, hit 292, 373 on base, 405 slugging across 25 games played. You also had Carlos Cortez, Hayden Sanger, and Wilmer Reyes were the other position players at last year's Fall League. When it comes to the pitchers last year, it was Garrison Bryant, Connor Gray, Colin Holderman, and Brian Meteor. Now, Holderman, of course, we saw, and he actually was terrible in the Fall League, which is ironic. Had an ERA over 8, but then we saw him with the Mets have some success and then get traded in the Daniel Vogelbach deal. So we'll see what happens if any of these players impact the Mets in 2023, but there's a good chance. So let's go through the names here. For the position players, you got Stanley Consuegra, you got Kevin Kendall, Brandon McIlwain, and Luke Ritter. Then you go to the pitchers, it's Grant Hartwig, Franklin Sanchez, Christian Scott, Mike Vassell, and Josh Walker. Now, beginning with the position players, Consuegra just turned 22 years old. He had a 755 OPS in low A this year, was promoted at the exact same time as Alex Ramirez going up to high A. And high A did not fare well, 690 OPS. I actually know Aram Layton. I've talked about him on the show before, the co-founder of Just Baseball, who's come on for our Farm Reports in the past to discuss prospects, one of the best prospect analysts out there, who has our top 100 at Just Baseball just went live, and he is currently at the Fall League right now. And these first two players we're going to discuss, he actually talked to me about this morning. Consuegra, he said, you see the guy on the batter's box, and you could tell he's an athlete, and you think, okay, who is this? And then you watch him swing the bat, and he did not come away impressed, to say the least. And, the numbers this year would certainly suggest that there is some holes in that swing. You go to Kevin Kendall, though, and he raved about him. 23-year-old utility player, played some second, short, center field, had 31 games played after he was drafted in the 7th round of 2021, where he was extremely successful last year, hitting 327, 421 on base, 551 slugging. Now he has an 844 OPS in 10 Arizona Fall League games. And you look at these guys that the Mets have at the Fall League, he's the one getting the most playing time. That's something that I think reflects pretty well on a prospect at the Fall League, because there's a lot of guys on the roster that can get playing time. The guys that are taking the ball a lot as pitchers or getting those at-bats, those are players that have impressed the coaches out there to get that playing time. So I think Kevin Kendall is the one position player here that you could say, all right, where's he going to slot in next year? Could he be a quick riser through the Mets system who could be a potential utility guy for them down the road? He's not going to be someone that's going to hit for insane amounts of pop, but could he have that type of a Louis Guillorme approach offensively, or Jeff McNeil, where he can spray hits, and if he can be solid defensively, he could be a really nice big leaguer one day. I don't know if that's necessarily in 2023, but he had a lost season this year due to injuries. Comes back healthy next year, and maybe opens things up in high A potentially, since he really hasn't played much minor league baseball at all up to this point. But if he can do that, it could be a pretty quick call up to double, I feel like, next year. And whatever season he has, he's someone that could be pushing for a 40-man roster spot by the end of next year if he has a really big season. But Kevin Kendall is definitely a name to watch moving forward. Now, we move on beyond that. You have Brandon McIlwain, 24-year-old, had a great year in high A this year, hit 298, 389 on base, 472 slugging in 48 games. But again, older prospect, at 23 years old, goes to double, didn't have a lot of success, 630 OPS in 50 games. He has a 698 OPS in 6 Arizona Fall League games up to this point. You got Luke Ritter, 7th round pick in 2019, career 705 OPS in the minors. Did have 33 extra base hits in 100 games at Double A this year, so that's promising. But overall, his line there wasn't great. A 215 hitter, 322 on base, 386 slugging, in 26 games in Triple A, 535 OPS. So he's one of these prospects that you hope that he has the power that can maybe become something. But at this stage, with his age and his current development, he's one of these fringe guys at this point that we just don't know where he's going to end up. So there's no Brett Beatty representing the Mets at the Arizona Fall League this year, one of these can't-miss young prospects. It's a lot of guys that are a little bit more on the periphery, and I think that, you could see the potential in a Consuegra just based on his athletic profile, that maybe he could still be a guy that could pop. McElwain and Ritter are guys that, I think are unlikely, I would say, at this stage in their minor league careers to be big-time prospects for the Mets at any stage, but you never know. And then Kevin Kendall is one of these kind of glue guy prospects that might shock us all and turn himself into a really nice big league player. So that is someone that I think we'll keep a close eye on throughout the Fall League. He's off to a great start with that 844 OPS, and we'll see how he continues to progress. Next season's going to be a big year for Kevin Kendall. But there are some pitchers that the Mets have at the Arizona Fall League that I am really excited about, particularly Grant Hartwig. We'll discuss him and the rest of the guys in just a minute, but first, a quick word from our sponsors. All right, so I teased the name Grant Hartwig. This is a prospect I'm actually really excited about, particularly as I did some digging on him before the show today. He was undrafted in 2021, first guy the Mets signed, and they might have found a steal here. He's 6'5", has a sinking fastball that can get a lot of grounders, and a great slider that throws about as much as the sinker. And he flew through their system this year. He'll turn 25 years old in December. He started the year in low A. Wasn't great based on the ERA, a 4.30 ERA, but that was really two bad appearances, one where he gave up 4 earned runs. He gets moved up to high A at the end of May, allowed just 1 earned run in 15 1/3 with 21 strikeouts, was then promoted again at the beginning of July to Double A, where he allowed just 3 earned runs in 23 2/3 innings throughout the real meat of the season towards the end, with 34 strikeouts. Then he ends up in Syracuse to close out his year, where he had 2 scoreless appearances. So the fact that they wanted to continue his season after Double A ended and promote him up to Triple A, that shows that they really value his stuff. And you look at everything that he did this year, all told, a 1.75 ERA across 4 stops, 83 strikeouts in 56 2/3. That's good for a strikeout per 9 of 13.2. And here's the big one. He only allowed 1 home run all season long. Now in the Fall League, he's already allowed a homer, and he's not having much success. 4 earned runs in his appearances so far, 5.68 ERA, but a lot of talent in the Fall League. And again, Colin Holderman last year had an ERA over 8 in the Fall League. Ended up being a really good Major League pitcher for the Mets through a good portion of the season. So Grant Hartwig is another one of these guys that a little bit older, but you really never know with relievers. He is squarely on the radar of the bullpen next year. Not a guy that's going to have a spot, locked in stone. He's probably going to start the year in triple, but someone that's going to probably get a good amount of work during spring training, that they're going to see what they have with him. And if that slider can continue to strike batters out, he's going to have a chance as a big league reliever next season. So Grant Hartwig, definitely the one guy that you really circle when you look at the pitchers in the Fall League for the Mets right now. Beyond that, it's a lot of guys that I think are more promise than production at this stage. You have Franklin Sanchez, a 6'6" lanky pitcher. This year in St. Lucie had a 3.90 ERA, 37 strikeouts and 30 innings pitched. In the Fall League, an ERA over 12. Christian Scott also pitching to an ERA north of 12, and this is obviously just a couple of bad outings in the early stages of the Fall League, but hard to pick up those numbers if you get rocked a couple times early. Christian Scott was the Mets' 5th-round pick in 2021 out of University of Florida, 4.45 ERA. This past year, spent time between low A and high A, but actually fared better in Brooklyn, and he was making starts there. So we'll see. He's made 3 starts in the Fall League, and I think, again, we talk about opportunities, right? The fact that he has been given the ball as one of the starters, that's a really good nod to him. Now, his success hasn't been great. We'll see if he remains in those Fall League rotations, but I think that he is a pitcher that is going to have a pivotal season next year. This a little bit too early to tell exactly what the Mets have in Christian Scott, but imagine next year he probably opens up in high A, and if they want to keep him in the rotation as a starter, we'll see if he can develop into someone that can help their upper minor league depth at starting pitcher. So next year is going to be massive for him because he's probably going to get a good amount of time in Double A, and that's where he can really prove his worth. Now you have Mike Vasil, who's kind of on the same line with Christian Scott. I believe they were sort of promoted at the same time this year. 8th round pick in 2021, was great in St. Lucie this season, 2.19 ERA, goes to high A and pitched worse. Christian Scott was worse in low A than high A this year. So you like the former, that you like the when a guy gets better as the leagues progress. But for Vasil, his success in high A was limited, 5.13 ERA in 8 starts. ERA in the fall league is over 8. We'll see what they have in Vasil. Josh Walker, the last pitcher the Mets have in the fall league. 37th round draft pick 2017. He'll be entering his 7th season in the Mets system. 3 earned runs in 6 fall league innings, a 4.50 ERA. Was really good in 2021. Pitched at 3 levels, high A, Double A, and Triple A. 3.73 ERA and 115 2/3. Then had an injury-plagued year this year where he only pitched 22 innings overall. And in Triple, he had a 6.91 ERA, and he was pitching out of the pen rather than the rotation. I don't know if that was simply due to the injuries he sustained, but he would have represented some upper-level starter depth to the Mets if not having gotten hurt this year. I don't know what he ever is for the Mets, but could he potentially be a swingman this year if he figures his stuff out and has a good spring and starts the season strong in AAA? He could be some depth for the Mets next season. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. We'll continue to monitor the Fall League. I'll probably do a podcast when the Fall League wraps up and kind of break down what all these guys did. And next week for our Farm Report, we'll dive a little bit more into the system as a whole and kind of recap what we just saw throughout the 2022 season. But as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter, @FinkelsteinRyan. Follow the show, @Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB, hosted by Paul Francis Sullivan. Locked On MLB is where you want to go to stay up to date with everything going on in Major League Baseball. You can follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.